There is a scientific explanation for ghosts. I know how to create one. By Tetewclice. Part 1. I can't tell you the relief that swept through every cell of my body when I stumbled across this forum. Finally, people who believe. For nearly a quarter century, I've been trying to convince anyone who'd listen that what happened to me during the summer of 1998, when I was 16, needs to be investigated, documented, publicized. I have evidence. I even have a witness. Still, almost everyone dismisses me, and the ones who don't are, how can I put this delicately, whack jobs. But you folks not only believe, you encourage and you support. I've been trying to do the same because I know what it's like to have lived through something harrowing and, on surface, absolutely illogical. Sometimes I even question my own memory. Then I return to the letters, the journals, and the film strips. Or I call Susie. She remembers too. At any rate, I feel ready to tell my own story here. Where do I begin? I'll start in the back of my father's Ford Escort. The car is parked in front of a sprawling old mansion nestled deep in the woods at the northmost tip of Lake Superior. I was in the back seat because I'd slept through the last few hours of the long trip from Minneapolis, where my father and I lived. The novelty of crossing a border into another country for the first time in my life had soon worn off, replaced by the monotony of a quiet drive through unchanging terrain. I had nothing against trees, but I'd never seen that many in my life, and eventually turned to my dreams for some scenic variety. I was still rubbing the sleep out of my eyes as a little drizzle began, creating rivulets of water on the windows. I watched as my father and grandfather built a corridor with room dividers, leading from the front door of the mansion to the back door of our car. As they started to drape a tarp over the dividers, forming an enclosed tunnel, I stewed in the vague sense of shame I always felt when others had to inconvenience themselves in order to accommodate my condition. I was startled by a sudden knocking and whipped my head around to see a girl peering through the other backseat window. She looked to be around 10 years old, with a serious face and long, straight black hair. Her skin was darker than mine, but that wasn't saying much, as I was practically an albino from lack of sunlight. I remember my father mentioning that there was an Ojibwe reserve, Canadians don't say reservation, nearby, and I reckoned the girl was First Nation. Another Canadianism. I reached over to roll down the window and a crack, yes, literally, roll down. My father favored all things manual. Can you roll it down more? The girl asked. I flushed. No, I better not. Are you moving in? I smiled a little at her directness, her lack of small talk. I didn't have a lot of practice interacting with people younger than myself. Just for the summer, I replied. She took a moment to watch through the two window panes, the impromptu construction project happening on the other side of the car. Do you melt in the rain or something? I laughed. No, I don't like wide spaces. My name's Lacey. What's yours? Susie, she replied. You should be careful around here, Lacey. My blood froze and my mouth went instantly dry. She'd given voice to a feeling that had dogged me almost from the moment we'd left home. A gradually increasing sense of dread, one that had penetrated even my dreams. It made no sense. I was moving into a place built to be a sanctuary, under the care of a person I trusted completely. I managed to croak out the question. Why? I never got an answer. The other backseat door opened and my attention was diverted. My father and grandfather crouched down and peered into the car, having finished their tunnel, beaming proudly like two neighborhood boys in a self-constructed treehouse. All ready for you, said Dad with his crinkly eyes. I suspect I was spared the awkwardness of my friends thinking he was the hot dad when he dropped me off at school. Because I didn't go to school. I didn't have any friends. I turned around so I could introduce Susie, but she was gone. Not a trace of her. Odd. Did you see where that girl went? I asked. What girl? Dad wondered. They both looked confused. No one lives around here for miles, Grandpa added with his thick German accent. Just me. I figured maybe Susie had been intimidated by the men and had darted off. This was at least the least alarming of the possibilities. I clambered out of the car and into the tunnel and immediately felt out of sorts. This was a makeshift solution, not a solid enclosure like a house or a car. One gust of wind and the walls could come tumbling down and a tarp could fly away, and I'd be exposed. Then I'd be dead, pulse quickening, breath getting shorter. I pushed past the two men and sprinted for the safety of the mansion front door. Safety. Ha! I had no idea what was in store for me. Why do you always feel sleepy after a long car ride, even one during which you managed to get some sleep? I'm not sure, but despite my eagerness to explore every nook and cranny of what I thought would be my home for the next 3 months, the comfy couch in the living room beckoned, and my first move was to occupy it and conk out. Roughly an hour later, my eyes fluttered open and I took in my surroundings. I imagined houses that size contained several rooms that could be referred to as the living room, but that's what I decided to call the one in which I found myself in. It was spare, without much in the way of personal touches. Most of the furniture was covered in white sheets. It had the unmistakable feel of a very large residence occupied by a single person. The one type of decor my grandfather clearly favored was taxidermy. The place was filled with stuffed animal heads, mostly deer, but also small game like woodchucks and rabbits, which seemed kind of silly to me. Some were mounted on the walls, others lay waiting to be. I didn't like the way they all stared at me with their beady little black eyes. I loved animals and hated the idea of hunting, and I had a hard time believing that someone as gentle as Grandpa could enjoy the sport. I could hear Dad and Grandpa talking in low voices in the kitchen, which adjoined the living room behind swinging doors. I couldn't quite make out what they were saying, but I thought Dad might have said something like, "I think we should tell her," and Grandpa might have replied with, "I don't think it's time." I assumed they were talking about informing my absent mother about something which was a frequent topic of conversation between them. In retrospect, I realized they were talking about me. I sat up and examined an old black and white framed photograph from the coffee table. It showed a young man and an older man standing in front of a sign that read, "The Woodley Institute." When I tilted the photo to blow the dust off it, I yelped. Sitting across from me in the easy chair that had been empty seconds ago was a gaunt, completely nude man with cruel eyes, a crew cut, and a sneer. He licked his lips repulsively at me, like a hungry wolf who'd come across a lost lamb. I shut my eyes tight. When I opened them, he was gone.